Thanks very much, everybody, for taking time out of your day to come and join us for our session today titled Controlling the Building to Reduce Cost and Complaints. My name's Paul Whelan. I work with the City of Melbourne, predominantly as a manager of a program called CitySwitch. It's a great time to be working in sustainability, as now we're really seeing local, state and international policy beginning to align. The City of Melbourne is in the process of developing or refreshing our zero net emissions strategy for the city, which aligns the city's sustainability action with the Paris Climate Pledge to target zero emissions by 2050. This approach is going to be complemented by the efforts of the State Government Climate Change Act and will help to harmonise the city's obligations and opportunities under that act. It's no secret to anyone here that the majority of emissions in cities are created by the energy that's used in the city's buildings. That's why the City of Melbourne, together with the cities of Sydney, Adelaide, Perth, and others, have been working together for almost 10 years on the CitySwitch program. For those of you who are not familiar, CitySwitch is a structured way for commercial office-based businesses to manage their environmental impact in a supported and evidence-based way. Across the country, 832 offices covering more than 3.5 million square metres of office space have made a commitment to CitySwitch. These businesses have committed to measuring their energy performance using NABERS and then improving on their NABERS rating over time. Businesses also commit to improving other aspects of sustainability through the CitySwitch program, like waste management or a reduction in emissions through renewable energy purchasing, for example. This chart shows the number and variety of projects that participants in the CitySwitch program undertook and then reported on in 2017. Participants are supported to undertake projects around these 4 key areas in CitySwitch. And we develop and then provide a host of online resources that are specifically developed for the commercial office sector. We provide one-on-one support from a local program manager, and we provide a network of leaders for inspiration and for leadership. We also host state and national awards so that we can recognise the achievement of the leaders in the industry. We've got a host of information resources online that I urge you to go and check out. If you have tenants in the buildings that you manage that need assistance, CitySwitch is here to help them. And all of our details are online on the CitySwitch website. But now I'm going to move to the topic at hand, controlling the building to reduce costs and complaints. So we all know that centralised HVAC systems are often the most energy intensive part of a commercial building. Various control strategies and systems can help optimise HVAC performance. However, ongoing monitoring, maintenance and tuning can be a time-consuming and often very costly undertaking, especially in the mid-tier property sector where resources are a lot more limited. Savills undertook research for Sustainability Victoria titled the Mid-Tier Office Investment Performance Study, and it concludes that while mid-tier offices perform poorer than their higher graded building stock, they have the potential to actually achieve parity of performance. So there is a lot of untapped potential in the mid-tier offices, and it's the facilities management crowd that can really help to unlock that. So we're here today to discuss perhaps one of the more controversial strategies for reducing HVAC energy use, and that's widening of deadbands. That is to increase the high and low points between which the heating or cooling systems will fire up and do their job of bringing the building temperature back into its set point settings. It's controversial because we understand that perceived tenant comfort, tenant complaint numbers, and particular lease provisions may act as disincentives to this simple cost and carbon saving control measure. So, today we have an esteemed panel that are going to talk us through some control strategies, some of the benefits and limitations of these control strategies, and how they can achieve savings. So first, at the far end, we have Alberta McAteer. Alberta joined Neighbours in 2005. She's the longest serving member at Neighbours, and her experience in the built environment industry is both broad and extensive. She has worked on and been involved with everything from processing Neighbours ratings, delivering training, developing rating tools, and the first foray into the international market, Neighbours in New Zealand. Alberta is now now leads creative content and strategy team at Neighbours. On this end, we have Cristhina Candido. Dr. Candido is a senior lecturer with the School of Architecture, Design and Planning at the University of Sydney. She's an architect by training and holds a PhD in civil engineering from the Federal University of Santa Clara and in environmental science from the Macquarie University here in Australia. Cristhina leads the BOSSA Building Occupant Survey System Australia tool, and her research and expertise relate to post-occupancy evaluation, indoor environment quality, activity-based working, workspace design, thermal comfort, and passive design in tropical and subtropical climates. So not really the kind of climates we're used to here in Melbourne. And finally, and certainly not least, we've got Michael Thompson from JLL, who works on the Australian Federal Police account. Michael's a sustainability manager, mechanical engineer, lifelong energy efficiency pragmatist. Having worked across a number of sectors, he resolutely supports mutually inclusive performance and efficiency in building services. This underpins his approach to sustainable design, construction and operation. All right, so now we're going to move into some questions for the panel. I'm going to take a seat because I look a lot less awkward sitting down than I do standing up. The first question I want to direct to Michael from JLL. Given that controlling costs is a key facilities management challenge, what are the simple, low-cost things that facilities managers can do to help reduce HVAC energy consumption?
Turn it off. It might sound like a flippant comment, but when you think about it, a chiller is in its most efficient state when it's off. Now, the approach I like to take towards any sort of energy efficiency or energy optimization in a building is take away what we don't need. Like, it's great to put solar in a building and fantastic, we've all heard that a million times. But if we're air conditioning a space where there is no one there, there's no requirement for that space to be conditioned, I'd posit that you can turn the system off. And innumerable buildings which I've had the pleasure to work in over the years has been that I've gone in there and the air conditioning is running 24/7 for the entire building. Now, there might be a 24/7 space in that building, granted, and they might be one zone in a larger building, but the rest of the building has no such requirement to be air conditioned for that period. So I'd say at the top of your list is things you don't need, get rid of. If that is a chiller operating when it doesn't need to, if your time schedules are out of whack, change them. They're easy fixes. If we want to drill down a little bit lower, controls is a great one. A lot of buildings are set and forget, especially with tenant fit-outs. Tenancies will go in there, they'll fit out the place, and they might not do an air rebalance, they might not interface properly with the BMS, and so you've got this tenancy who's barged their way into the building and messed up all these beautiful controls that were delivered by the base building contractor, maybe, and there's no commissioning done, there's no tuning done, and so we're in this position where we have a building which on paper should be performing beautifully and in reality is a dog's breakfast. Then we can sort of start drilling into the weeds of it and into the topic of this presentation, which is start to whittle down deadbands. And we talk about deadbands in the context of the tenancy, but I've had experience with critical environments and tenancy critical environments as well, and they're often overlooked. The tenancy will go, oh yeah, we want to have our deadbands between 18 and 25 or 19 and 25 or whatever they want. That's fine. And then you go into their comms room or their server room or their data center or whatever it is they have, and that's sitting there at 22 or 21 degrees, and you go, seriously? the computer's complaining much these days. And that's an easy fix. And data centers, because of their enclosed and circled nature, are very easy to approach that way. Like, it's much easier to change a data center than it is to change a tenancy. So sort of those are my top three. You know, we can start with taking what we don't need. We can make what we have more efficient, and then we can start to really drill into the weeds of changing existing paradigms.
So it's a hierarchy of actions. You go for the least cost, least time, intensive actions first, and then move down the list from there?
Absolutely. Everything takes time. Everything takes time and money. And time is money as well. So pretty much everything takes money. So if any of you out in the audience go to your building owner or go to the person controlling your budget and go, I want to do this. Dollars to dimes, that person's going to go, okay, how much is it going to cost me? And what's the ROI? Fair point? So I would go with the biggest ticket items off the bat. Because if nothing else, if you're going to come out and start proposing energy efficiency, you've got to have runs on the board, you've got to have some cred about it. And if you're coming out with something which is really expensive and really slow to pay back, they're going to go, we can probably invest our money better elsewhere, and you'll be ignored, or your idea will be shelved until the next financial year. Probably. If you get something really easy, smash it out, and your ROI is hundreds of thousands of %, and your payback's in months, not years, months, then that's straight off the bat, you've got cred for the next project. They'll pretty much believe whatever you say for the next one. Assuming
that's how
it's
you've
true.
kept your job.
We've had a lot of success that way.
Yep.
It's helped steer the conversation towards the bigger items, which we're talking multi-$100,000, multi-million-dollar projects for tenancy retrofits, because we work very much in the tenancy space, or that is at least my role. And to get those projects up and to leverage them to happen, we need to have some credibility with the small things and show actual results. And often the results we get, because we've started to pare back the operating budget, you know what that money can now be used for? Pay for the big ticket stuff. And a few cuts over here, which no one has noticed, but have all added up to maybe $100,000 in an annual property operating budget, can now suddenly be funneled into a larger CapEx project.
Thank you. I want to throw over to the other two members of the panel on this question of reducing energy consumption in HVAC, and what are some of the simple things that facilities managers can do. I know it might not be your particular area of expertise, and I do want to hear from the audience in a moment when we get to our final question. But do either of you have anything to add on the first question?
I think the first point is just to find out, what's happening in that building. One of the best ways to do that is obviously get a NABERS rating. If you don't know where you stand, how can you start digging if you don't know how you compare to other buildings that are out there?
So measurement is the key to understanding where some issues may lie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think in addition to the objective side of things, which is perhaps doing a rating and actually measuring the conditions people are experiencing too, is actually to also listen to what people have to say. Yeah, and trying to really quantify which sort of dissatisfaction rates you're actually getting from that particular space, because a lot of these are often just assumed as being 10%, 12%, or maybe you just have one or two people in that particular floor complaining about their conditioning. But not often you actually know how many of them are dissatisfied with that particular space.
That's a good segue into our next question. You mentioned dissatisfaction. So in relation to adjusting set points or expanding deadbands, there's a lot of sensitivity and perhaps even some fear for facilities managers to adjust temperatures. Many are concerned that it might contravene lease conditions, whilst others will fear an influx of occupant complaints or dissatisfaction. Do you think that those fears are justified?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. There are many reasons why we're all interested in thermal comfort. Yeah, well, thermal comfort is an issue from the research perspective. We spend time doing research on it to understand it's a real issue for those who are experiencing the building. Building occupants tend to complain about temperature, humidity, so on and so forth. And it's definitely an issue from those who are trying very bravely to manage thermal comfort day to day, because that's quite of a challenge. But that is also a challenge for building owners that are providing that suddenly as part of the service to tenants. So I think what I want to say on this particular topic before we get into the temperature set points is I think this is a discussion that we cannot afford not to have. Just last week in Sydney, we're experiencing 33 degrees in April, which is really odd. Yeah. So if we assume that we're going to be relying more in air conditioning buildings because we're actually experiencing hotter and hotter summers, but also more frequently and for longer durations of time, very likely we know that air conditioning is like a drug. Yeah. More than we are exposed to it, more we depend on it, and more we expect to have those conditions. So why are we doing this? Yeah? Why are we trying so hard to provide tight control and tight temperature conditions indoors? Why are you conditioning the space in the first place? You're trying to achieve comfort, aren't you? Yeah? It's about people. You're trying to provide conditions for people to develop the activities, right? But here's the thing about this. Dissatisfaction is human nature. And I know mechanical engineers don't like to hear that, but architects, and I'm an architect, I can cause trouble. Dissatisfaction will always be there. But if you embrace that, rather than trying to beat it so hard, and you're never going to win this, yeah, then we have an opportunity to be a little bit more creative and adventurous when it comes to temperatures indoors. And I'm not trying to say that you should go all crazy and say, let's have 30 degrees C indoors. That may work in tropical climates, but I don't think that's going to fly in Melbourne or Sydney. But can we actually try 1 degree higher? Can we go to 25 degrees indoors? What I can say from the research that we've done, both in lab and field, is 25 degrees. You're just going to find the same level of dissatisfaction that you find with 24 and 23 and 22 and 21. So the energy conservation side of this story and the impact on the environment is huge. So let's stop this nonsense for a bit. Let's actually try to have a different discussion about why, how we use air conditioning, make it part of a bigger story. Yeah, it's part of our cities, it's part of livability, and we have a responsibility to this. Yeah.
I'm interested in hearing from our other two panelists on this, because you've touched on values, you've touched on this idea that we're always going to have a level of dissatisfaction, and that we need to accept that, and that perhaps the discussion is about values. It's about valuing the environmental impact over valuing whether you have 10 or 12% dissatisfaction or complaints. But what are the hard numbers that facilities managers really have to deal with? We're talking about triggers that shouldn't be tripped in leases, the conditions that need to be respected in leases. How much are they a driver of whether we can or can't start playing around with set points?
So I think one of the biggest issues about this, and everyone in the crowd nod if you sort of agree with this one, is that right there in the performance standards in any lease will be something along the lines of summer conditions 22 plus 1.5 tops, or 22.5 plus 1.5, and winter conditions 22.5 minus 1.5, or something of that nature. It's probably about right. So 21 to 24, that's what we're stuck with. And so I, building owner, have this great idea. I want to widen my dead bands. I want to make it so that tenancy is controlled between 19 to 25, something like that. And the tenant goes, oh, I'm a bit cold, sends in the guy with a thermometer, and the reading comes back at 20.9 degrees. And the tenant goes, rent abatement. Thank you very much. Fix this, or we're not paying our rent for the next month. And in extreme examples, like we got a better offer from building owner next door, we're going there. So that is a very real consequence to doing that. Now, you can vary a lease mid-term, no doubt. It's a lot of paperwork and it requires a bit of negotiation. but it can be done. And I would say on that basis that maybe the point that we need to start with is we need to be smarter at how we're negotiating our leases. Maybe that 21 to 24 isn't the panacea that we were promised it would be. It's a set of numbers that we've been given over time. I can't claim to know where they came from. The predicted mean vote. If you look at Green Star, perhaps, Green Star in its first iteration awarded you a point for achieving 1 to -1 PMV under a set number of conditions, and 2 points for 0.5 to -0.5 under a set of the same conditions. And historically, you achieve those between 21 to 24 in most buildings. And so perhaps that's where we come from, and it's rating tools like Green Star which are guiding our design criteria and our comfort criteria. So I'm not saying Green Star's wrong, and I love what it has done for the buildings industry. It has driven it in a way that we could never have imagined back then. But it may be time to revisit that and go, right, maybe we should look at this qualitatively rather than quantitatively. When we're negotiating our leases, when we're reviewing our leases and renegotiating them, maybe the performance standard should be, I don't know, that you get fewer than 10% complaints or fewer than 1 out of 100 complaints or something like that, some metric like that, which is more qualitative and more dependent on how people are actually perceiving their environment rather than what we are forcing on the occupants. And tenants, from their point of view, and as a tenant rep, I know this all too well, need to come to that party. If we're going to be dressed in business attire, shirt, suit, tie, and expect to have 25, 26 in the office, we're going to cook our staff. So we need to be reasonable there as tenant reps.
I guess another option might be to completely turn it on its head and not have those kind of temperature set points in there, and perhaps focus more on the tenants and put something like an indoor environment rating in there which does consider thermal comfort. I think if you said to a tenant, do you want the temperature band to be this, or do you want an indoor environment rating which is, considering your thermal comfort, to be 4 or 5 stars, I'm sure they'd be more interested in that than that kind of very narrow band of temperatures which, as Cristhina said, no one's really comfortable. You're not going to please everyone.
So how might we, as people working in this field and speaking to facilities managers, how might we move from what is currently a very rigid system of set points in a lease to a future where we're talking about tenant comfort? How do we make that transition? What evidence do we need? How much is it culturally ingrained in the property sector, and what are the steps along the way to achieving that?
I think it's quite interesting to actually talk in terms of dissatisfaction, because if you look at the BOSSA database, which has about 10,000 occupant surveys from 100 workspaces in Australia, you're always going to find from the top end of the market, I'm talking about the best workspaces in Australia, when it comes to thermal comfort, you're always going to be dealing with at least 15% dissatisfaction. And when you look into the complaints, and these are actually spaces that have a very narrow temperature set point that is being, implemented through leases or through whatever reason, it's there. But if you think at, Green Star, Neighbours, well-certified spaces, you're still dealing with 15 at least % of dissatisfaction. When you look at through the dissatisfaction, where it's coming from, is because it's too cold during summertime and it's too hot during wintertime. If you work in an office, you know that that's the case. It's true. It's just true. Yeah? So what is it that we're doing here? We're actually writing temperature set points into leases, we're enforcing them, but then that is far from guaranteeing you having less than 10% dissatisfaction. So I actually see this as an opportunity. If you're always going to have 15% dissatisfaction, 18, 20%, then what is the problem of raising by 1 degree? What is the big deal of actually trying different strategies, relaxing, the way we dress every Friday? Why not? What I just, as an academic, so I'm not tied to the cost, but from the research perspective, we actually have enough proof to say we can change that, and we have to. Yeah.
So in a practitioner sense, how do we take something like the academic research that's saying even in the highest performing top tier we're getting 15% dissatisfaction still, how do we use that knowledge to change the industry, to change the culture, to change the expectations, because that's our job as cities, as people who design performance tools, and as practitioners on the ground. How do we change the decision makers, and who are the decision makers that are driving these tight set points, these tight deadbands?
I think it starts at the top. I think the tenants, the building owner doesn't care. The building owner doesn't care what the temperature is. It doesn't affect them on a physical level. Sure, you'll get rent abatement if you stray outside the ranges, but the building owner is not affected by it. I think most of you out there would agree that if you could turn the air conditioning off, or you could run it up to a higher deadband, that you would cheer, because it means your costs have come down. Right? So I think it involves a mature discussion with the tenant. Now, I mentioned that your costs have come down the base building side. A lot of the time, there's very much we live in a commercial world, and the reality is there's very much a quid pro quo attitude out there. The tenant always wants something more, and the base building owner always wants to give less away. It's just the reality of the situation. And so the tenant is there going, all right, well, if we do this, what's in it for us? And I think it's time for a mature conversation. And as a tenant rep, we're already having those conversations with building owners around, how can we work together to both get something out of the experience? We raise our temperatures, maybe our rent is cheaper, or maybe there is some other incentive provided by the landlord. But I think that if we took that approach, we could both come out ahead. Like, tenants and landlords can come out ahead, and we get this 1 degree deadband shift. You're right. There will always be people in tenancies to complain. I've seen enough of them to know that. And there'll be one person in every tenancy who raises a workout about everything. The base building owner sends their contractor out to look at it, and it's exactly the right temperature. It's doing exactly as the design says it should. No issue. So it's just that person complaining because they can. So I think if, from a corporate point of view, from a corporate tenancy point of view, we approach this and say we want to do it, we want to engage with it, and there are benefits, and we know that we can take on a corporate responsibility and push that agenda, then we can throw that over to the base building owner and say, we're game, are you? And then we can have that conversation about who gets what and how we can both benefit from the meeting of parties. I think in my head that's how I'd play it out, and we're playing it back, as I said, with a number of our tenancies already. I know there are Australian government agencies who, in peak periods currently, have policies in place. Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet rolled out a policy last summer which basically said, stand by, we're going to 26 in peak days. This is a direct corporate responsibility to keep peak demands down across the grid. So they're on board with that. And then at a lower level, there are other departments going, you know what, we'll give 24.5 a try. We'll give 25 a try. Can you tee up a meeting with the building owner, run us through what the costs would be to implement that, how they'd feel about that, and that's the sort of conversation that we're starting to have now.
Thank you. I want to shift now to talk about Neighbours. So obviously an improvement in HVAC efficiency has a positive impact on Neighbours, and we know that a good Neighbours rating can affect value and occupancy in a building in the positive. So Alberta, I want to know, has there been any research that quantifies the difference in energy use and resulting Neighbours rating and from HVAC efficiencies, and if so, what were the findings?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first point, just to remind everyone that Neighbours is technology neutral. So, you don't get extra points or a better rating because you've got the latest bells and whistles in the building. So an energy rating is going to look at 12 months energy consumption, and the more efficient you are, the better the rating you'll get. There has been a long-established link with energy efficiency or HVAC efficiency and better star ratings. There's been a number of studies over the years. One way back in 2009. By Graham Agar, and others, looking at greening pre-loved buildings, modelled the impact of just having dirty filters in your air conditioning, and that showed a half-star impact. So something as simple as basic maintenance can actually impact on your neighbour's energy rating. More recently, there was a paper from 2017, energy performance and CO2 emissions of HVAC systems in commercial buildings. Looked at renovating an old commercial building in Sydney, putting in efficient HVAC, and found they were able to model a 5-star rating. So there's a bunch of studies that are out there, you can easily find them. But I think what's more interesting is, what we're actually seeing in the NABERS ratings that are being done. So we've got a huge database with a lot of information and a really valuable source of information now. We recently looked at the indoor environment ratings that have been done over the past few years. And there has actually been quite a significant increase in the number of indoor environment, I think, with more interest in well and the Green Star performance tools. There's a lot more interest in indoor environment. And we looked at the buildings that had both NABERS energy ratings and indoor environment ratings, and found that those that had high indoor environment ratings tended to have higher NABERS energy ratings as well. So I think that shows that you don't have to trade off indoor environment quality for energy efficiency, which is often something that's been said in the past. So it's really interesting to see that. Another really interesting thing we've been doing over the last 12 months is piloting a new application process called Coassess, and we'll be launching this soon at our conference coming up on the 5th of June. NABERS Coassess will allow building owners and facility managers to rate tenants in a building alongside the base building and whole building rating. So it's a really streamlined way of getting a whole bunch of information and a whole bunch of ratings in a single property at the same time. So in our pilot that we've been running for the past 12 months, one of the pilot participants, an assessor, had a building that he wanted to put through the pilot. He knew that this building was actually performing pretty poorly. It had a very low base building rating, so he put it through the system to see, what ratings and what information he could glean from that. And he found that the whole building rating was a little bit better than the base building rating. Then when he got the tenancy applications out, they were actually really pretty good. So, having that information on what was happening in the whole building, he was able to then, do a little digging to find out, well, what's actually going on in that building, and found, he suspected maybe, perhaps some of the tenant energies on the base building boards. Looked into that. No, it wasn't. The metering configuration was actually okay. What he found when he dug a little further is that the HVAC system had actually been running 24/7 for a number of years. So, I guess it just highlights the way that NABERS can really just be that first step to finding out, what's going on in a building. Are we performing well? And with our new Coassess application that I'm really quite excited about, it's really going to help people to start, just be that first step to digging into what's going on in a building, finding out more.
I'm interested in the NABERS Coassess in what some of the potential co-benefits might be coming out of that. So if you have a building owner getting a base building rating and then enabling tenants to get very low cost ratings as part of that, what potential can that have for the relationship between owners and tenants, which might result in other kind of more different kind of projects, like the ones we're talking about with widening deadbands? Is that likely to make that more palatable if we have a better relationship?
Yeah, I really think so. I think this is something that could really transform the building space, particularly for facility managers. It's an opportunity to actually start engaging with your tenants. You might have tenants, saying to you that, well, we just want to be in a 5-star building, we want to be in a 6-star building. But this will give, you the opportunity to bring your tenants into the fold and say, well, sure, we can be 5 or 6 stars, but we want to take you on that journey as well. How efficient is your tenancy? Let us work with you and help you so that, you can perform at the high level that we are. So it's really, I guess, an opportunity to start having those conversations, and particularly, start talking about things like thermal comfort in the building, making it a two-way conversation, not just, we're providing this for you. It really makes it two-way.
Michael, as someone on the ground working in buildings, do you feel that Coassess is going to have many co-benefits? Do you feel it's going to be a conduit to better relationships between tenants and facilities managers and owners?
Or you might have the reverse
You're
effect.
supposed to say yes.
Sorry,
This is a Dorothy Dixer, really.
I mean, yes. I think it's an interesting point, especially when you have green leases in place between the building owner and tenant, and they've both got their respective targets. Especially for A-schedule green leases. Now, I don't know how many of you out there are familiar with A-schedule green leases, but generally the NABERS target is prescribed as a whole building target. And I've had tenancies in the past, and base buildings as well, where one has carried the other. So you'll either see like the tenant is smashing it with a 5.5 star equivalent performance, and we've got the meter data to show that. And the base building's sort of dragging its heels at 4.5. But because of the way the whole building rating tool works, it averages it out, and the rating ends up at 5 stars, and everyone thinks they're doing a great job. The reality is that one party is doing amazing, and the other party is doing not so great. I think, and Alberta, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, but what Coassess will do is it'll be able to highlight those disparities and create a talking point for the tenant and landlord to have a discussion at the next BMC about who needs to do what better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's completely what it will do.
I want to move on to a final question, because we've got 8 minutes to go, and I want to bring in some questions or some responses from the audience on this. But I want to talk about what kind of barriers do we feel facilities managers are likely to face in implementing HVAC changes, and then also how facilities managers can resolve these. So I'll start with the panel, and then if we've got some responses or some questions from the crowd about barriers and also resolutions to barriers around HVAC performance.
I might just jump in briefly and note, knowledge, lack of knowledge is always something that can be a factor. So I'd give a plug to the training that OEH offers for facility managers. We're piloting some new courses designed just for facility managers, so take a look into that. And there's also training on HVAC specifically as well, so look out for that training.
Fantastic.
I jump in here and say time. You're all and thank you all for being here today, because I know that you've all got buildings and properties and premises to manage, and that's a full-time job. And because it's a full-time job, it means that things like energy efficiency, you might be passionate about it, you might not be. But you certainly don't have all day to sit around noodling into meter data or noodling into this, that and the other. And it's the case for all of us, that we all have our jobs to do. And time for me, and from my perception of the FMs I work with, is always the killer. I'll go, oh, this is great. And they go, yeah, I'll add it to the list of 50 million things I've got to do today. Number one being extinguish an actual fire. So it's true. And the second is money, time and money. And because they're the analogues of each other, you basically go money. So you don't either got the time to do it, or if you do have the time to do it, you don't have the funding to do it. Too often I've personally come up against roadblocks where we go, this is a fantastic idea, the ROI is out of sight, why not do it? And the owner of the purse strings has gone, well, that's a great idea, let's do it next financial year. And you query that and you go, but the opportunity cost is terribly low, and we've got a fantastic opportunity here, let's go for it, let's do it. And it's like, oh, but we don't have actually got no money to do it. So I'd say time and money are the two biggest impediments that I see to getting what are often great initiatives, great ideas, or even having any ideas at all get off the ground. And
what then can a facilities manager do to help resolve the time, money crunch? Like where are the places that they can go for information? Where are the places that they can go for funding?
Sure.
Good advice?
So there's no end of useful remora fish, let's call them, but consultants externally or internally within your businesses who can assist you with that. I work for JLL, and JLL has a model in its corporate services business where we actually have sustainability managers. I'm myself one of them, and we provide that assistant ancillary service to our FM team. It's not their job to find the opportunities or implement them. It's my job. And that means that I can draw on their knowledge of their premises and their buildings and get that information out of them, because that's their job and that's their domain. But what I do with that information, what I do with those opportunities next, is up to me. It takes the time away from them, and it means that, sure, there's a dedicated resource and a cost component to them, but if we're generating, and to date on one account I've generated $2 million worth of savings, annual savings, mind you, I'm feeling that my role is kind of paid for itself. And so...
Or you're not getting paid enough.
Tell me about it. Sorry, I said that too loudly.
It's worth a shot.
Dear JLL. But no, in seriousness, it vindicates the decision to implement a resource like that. It's a bit of a leap of faith initially, but it doesn't need to be a full-time. It doesn't need to be a full-time resource either. You can engage an external consultant or anyone you like to come on board and assist you in that process. And there are plenty of people out there who are more than happy to go through that process with you and give you the most outstanding service you'll ever have. Up to you how you want to play that out. And if you look at your portfolio and go, you know what, I'm going to suck it and see for a year, and if it doesn't pay for itself, it was a small investment, if nothing else. That didn't work out. All investments have risk, so it's just one other investment. But it's highly likely if your fleet is at 3 stars or 2.5 stars or something like that, that there are opportunities there. And that's the time when you go, the Neighbours has told me that I've got room for improvement. I don't have the time to find where that room is. I'm going to get someone else to help do that because they've got the time and I don't.
I'm mindful that we've got a couple of minutes left, so do we have any questions from the audience or any comments, especially on what some of the barriers might be? We've got one down here. Do we have a roving mic? Just straight through here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Prachi. I am I'm a PhD student at RMIT University. Sorry.
That's right.
I am doing PhD at RMIT. I'm working with facilities manager. As Cristhina said, that always people would be dissatisfied. My question is I worked at 4 hospital buildings, and what I found out is the major dissatisfaction is not because of the temperature or IAQ setting, it's the design. And that's what the facilities managers have to deal with because they come later in the picture when the design is already done. And one of the managers actually said it's like putting Band-Aid on a Band-Aid. So I just want to see how, I want to know how do you think we can solve this problem, including managers in the design feature would be the best approach, but usually that doesn't happen. They come later in the picture, so how we could address that?
I think there is a side to this, and it's the evidence. Yeah, not the evidence coming from research, but the evidence and the knowledge that comes from those trying to deliver good conditions in the building. So if you know what the nature of complaint is, and if you actually go back historically on those complaints, very quickly you figure out where the issues are coming from. And you're right. It's not about temperature, has never been about temperature. It's about something else. It's quite often related to just us being dressed the wrong way. It's often been about us being attached to a desk that is just, under whatever conditions that is drafty. It's after us not having control over the conditions because it's an air conditioning building and it's really costly and difficult to implement. It's the lack of air movement, or it's draft, or it's everything combined. So I think the first thing is actually to have the lodgement of complaints and keep that as, that is the best archive, it's the best one, it's the best source of knowledge. And then if it is coming always from the same person, then it's not 10% dissatisfaction. It's not even 1% dissatisfaction. It may be just 0.5% dissatisfaction. So why are we trying so hard to satisfy just one person from that particular fault? So I think having this cumulative evidence is really important as well, and we shouldn't overlook that.
Did you say your issue was around the design that you've inherited?
Building is, all the buildings, most of them are either they don't have a window, it's not operable, there's a glare out from the window, there's always some design related issues than the air quality and temperature.
It's a perennial issue for FMs everywhere. The responsibility for the creation of that problem lies with the developer, plain and simple. Choose my words carefully here. So with a design, often identify where the root cause is. Root cause of your issue, and often it's because someone cheaped out on something, or someone's thought that a system could operate in a way that it truly couldn't. Identify what the root cause is, isolate it, assure yourself that that's what caused any problem, and replace it. It's basically the approach that we've had to do from quite a number of tenancies, be it because they're zoned up incorrectly and we're running an entire building's worth of air conditioning for one 24/7 area, or because we don't have any SUPs to support a higher load. But whatever the reason is, you need to identify the problem, and that becomes not only a energy efficiency matter, but in your case it sounds like a WHS matter as well, particularly if you're in a hospital where you have people with all manner of impediments and problems. It's unacceptable that we have designs like this, but at some point, if you've bought the design, you pay for the design, and you ticked off on the design, you kind of inherited the problem and you've owned that problem because you've let it happen. And the next step is to pretty much stump up and fix the problem. And unfortunately, there's no nice way to say it. If you can get an energy efficiency benefit out of it, it does put a little bit of sugar on the medicine spoon, but there's only so much you can tune and change with controls before you realise that, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole just ain't going to cut it.
Thank you. I like the musical reference. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. To wrap up today's session, thank you very much to Alberta, Michael and Cristhina for your time, and thanks everyone for coming along and listening. I'm Paul Whelan. I work for the City of Melbourne on CitySwitch, so if you have any questions about the program, do come up and ask me, or go online at cityswitch.net.au. If you have any questions for our panellists that you didn't want to ask in front of a room full of people, I'm sure they'll be around for a few minutes and you can ask them now. Thank you very much for coming along.